This is very exciting. What are the sizes you have? Slab saws. Ooh, Heidi, 24 and 36. Okay, 24-inch. Scott, 18-inch. Wow, Ted, 20. I see 2 16s. Wow. We have a variety of sizes we have here in our audience, and definitely this topic that we have for tonight will gonna be nuggets for all of you. So we are excited for the topic tonight. It is all about diagnosing problems and adjustments of your slab saw. So the same drill, you can raise your hand if you have any questions by going through the reaction icon on the bottom part of your Zoom and then click raise hand. And all right, so you can also post your questions on the chat, and we can cue that for John and Sherman. So yep, joining us our CEO John Rowland and our General Manager Sherman Rowland. So let's kick this off. Everybody sit back, relax, and enjoy tonight's Highland Park live interactive webinar.
Thank you, Lizelle. And why don't you go ahead and get me up on here in the spotlight there, team, and let's pull John up here. Great to have all you guys here. You know, what's crazy is we had, how many people registered for this thing? 200 something. We don't know how many people are going to be here, and we'll see how far we can go with the amount of seats, but great to have all you guys here. We've got a lot of content tonight. My name's Sherman Rowland, of course. I've talked to probably a lot of you guys. I run the U.S. operations, general manager of Highland Park, which covers North America, although I handle a lot of international. And then John, my bro, over there in his very fancily decorated Chinese apartment, which I always love. They always like that frilly stuff.
Beautiful. Look at these curtains. Oh, there's something else.
So classic. So we make fun, but it's fun. He's there on Saturday morning on the Chinatown. Is the weather any better over there? Or is it still cold?
Oh, it's finally warming up. It got down to 44 degrees, which is pretty chilly when you got a little tiny radiant heater.
Yeah. All right, so where we want to start in here first, John, and then guys also on the webinar here. So we got a lot of content. We're going to probably break this into a couple of webinars.
After I started putting together all the videos, I really decided that this should be probably 2 parts, because I want to give everybody enough time to ask their questions and talk about some specific cases. I'm sure people have got saws that they're working on or that they are wanting to improve the performance of. So I want to have time for doing that with you all. So
and let me make clear too, also, we're covering all saws. It's not just a Highland Park thing. There's Beacon Stars, there's Royals, there's Duckets, there's all kinds of great saws out there. And so what we're going to be also focusing on is, if it's specific to particular areas like Phantoms or whatever, John will call it out. We've probably owned damn near every saw type there is over the last 30 years, wouldn't you say? Most of them.
Yeah.
We haven't owned a Ducket.
I haven't. No, I owned a Duckets.
Did you?
Yep. I haven't had a Nelson, but I'm familiar with them. But there's a lot of different saws out there, and the principles that we'll talk about today are going to be applicable for pretty much every saw that's been built. With maybe a few exceptions. There's some Rube Goldberg kind of jobs out there. But what I want to start with, let's see, we just hit the 100 mark. We got 100 people on here. I want to start with diagnosing. And so what I did is I got out on one of our saws, and it was almost complete saw, but I tore it apart, and then and I did both diagnosis and and what we'll cover next week, we'll be talking about alignment. I don't think we're going to have time to cover all of that with the diagnosis today. So
hey, before you go further, John,
yeah,
we forgot to roll the video that featured people from last week. Do you want to roll that, or you just want to get into the discussion?
We got a lot of content, and Lizelle should have pushed that button. So I think we're past the video, and let's just get into some content.
All right.
So let's roll our video number 1, Markar.
Hi, I'm John Rowland, and thanks for joining our webinar. What I'm going to talk to you about today is about diagnosing saw problems. Now, I'm going to use a couple of our machines that we're in production on and show you some things, because I see lots of comments on Facebook and people basically talking about their machine. They're having problems with their machine, and they're getting bad cuts, and then they'll get huge amount of response and all kinds of answers that a lot of times are not very well thought out, and they're not very helpful. So what I'm going to start with are some of the basics when you're looking at a saw and you're having bad cuts, or you're getting binding, or you're getting a slab that's tapered, what to look for first. And it's really good criteria to look at if you're buying a used saw, because you can have an idea about what is wrong with the saw and what you're going to need to do. So first, we're going to look at the carriage. Now, on our saws, they have roller bearings on the carriage. And the roller bearings, there's 12 total. There's 8 on the top, and there's 4 on the bottom. And there's an adjustment on these carriage retainers. So when you are grabbing the carriage and pulling up and down, you have no slop. Now, if the machine is old, sometimes these roller bearings will get loose and you'll get slop where it goes up and down, which is not a problem on a square rail saw like this. It just means you need to replace the roller bearings. However, if you've got a round rail saw and you got slop on your main rails, then that's a problem. Now let me show you how I would go about checking for that. So, coming closer on this, I'm gonna use my indicator. Now this indicator is the one that we sell. Get over on this side. And so what I'm on right now is I'm on the top of the carriage. Now if I grab the carriage and I just go up and down on it, you can see there's a very tiny amount of movement. That is about the third of the thickness of a human hair, which that's good. If you see where you're getting movement that looks like this, that's going to cause you problems in the cut. Now, likewise, when I come over to the side, I can come over on the side of the carriage. Now, you can do this on all 4 corners of the carriage. Get my indicator tight, and then I go back and forth, and I got very little movement there. That's 0.02 mm. So 0.02 mm, doing the math really quick, is 0.7 of a thousandth of an inch, which is like less than a third of the thickness of a human hair. So that's the first thing you look at, which is how the carriage makes to the main rails. The second thing to look at is the cross feed. And you can do the same thing where you take the indicator, and you might have to rig up something where you can get the indicator on top of it. And what you're looking at there is on this bore here, if your indicator's on the top and you take it and you move it, and you're getting a lot of deflection, that tells you that bore is worn out. Then likewise, if you put the indicator on the side here and go back and forth, that will tell you, is your cross feed loose or your cross feed not loose? So that's the diagnosis on the carriage.
So basically, when you're looking at a carriage, whether it's a roller bearing carriage or whether it's a round rail carriage, and I'll talk about this a little later on. The style of carriage that you have with like a lower tone or our tabletop machines, our HT machines, that if you see slop in there, those are going to directly translate into problems in the cut. So you need to eliminate that. Now, why we don't build a saw like the old round rail Highland Park versions is because the problem with that round bore with a casting sliding on it is when that bore becomes worn, you are going to have a hard time to fix it. The only way really to fix a round rail carriage that has the main rail bores worn is to go to machine shop and for them to pick up the original bore and line bore it and then bush it. Now, the problem with that is that the consistency and the tolerance of the machining on that from saw to saw they were pretty much hand fitted on those originally. So
talk more about hand fitting because this is important when people are looking at replacement parts.
Take for instance, if you look at the cross feed, that the red part that we call the vice base, that's the part that the vice bolts to. Now, on HP saws, if I try and sell somebody a vice base and they put it on their old HP saw, what we found was the distance between the two rods, that the slide rods, the distance is varying on the old machines. It's not the same from machine to machine.
Up to 3/8 of an inch difference on the center line.
It's not that much.
I had one that was pretty big,
but there was a lot of variability. And the problem is that then you can't take a modern part and know that it's going to fit every single one of the old saws because they're all over the map, which is why we kind of stopped selling those as a replacement part because it was just a crapshoot. It was kind of like maybe not even a 50-50 thing to have it fit because
less than 50. And our part was always wrong from the perspective of the customer.
Yeah.
It's like, your part's wrong. I mean, your saw is very different from the one built next to it in 1972 in wherever it was built.
Hand fitted them. They hand fitted them. So the challenge, if you're dealing with an old machine and you're looking at the bores, really the only way, if you're going to try and resurrect a round rail machine, is get over to a machine shop, and they have to have both parts. They have to have the front and rear brackets so they know what the dimension is for the rail spacing, and they have to have the carriage so they can line it up, bore it out, put in the bushings, and then put it all back together. Now, for a lot of people and a lot of machine shops, it's just not worth it. If you have access to a machine shop or a buddy in a machine shop, then you can benefit from that, because sometimes they'll do you a favor and help you without charging you like a $250 an hour rate or what a lot of machine shops do. So that basically is looking at the diagnosis of the carriage and how to tell if your carriage is loose. Obviously, if you got a roller bearing carriage, it's very easy to correct it and adjust it. Round rail carriage, if you're buying a saw, it's really good to know that, that saw, like if you look at it and you can see the main rails have a lot of slop in them, you may not want to buy the saw. Or if you're buying it, you should be paying a lot lower price if you know you're going to have to go to a machine shop and have those rails line bored and bushed. So that's just helpful to know. So let's go to, I think our second video is looking at Arbor bearings.
Can I cover one thing on on this question? Because there's a question that's been asked for me is, what about when you've got like a loose bore? Are there any things, like I've seen before, people will take a brass nut, drill and tap with a jam nut to try to take some of that slop out of that bore. Thoughts on that?
Well, you can try and cheat a little bit. Matter of fact, there was a saw I used to have think it was R&M. It was a saw, a little brown saw out of Oregon, and it had a round rail on it, and they put a screw on the bottom of the rail that you could adjust to take slop out, but it wasn't entirely effective. I mean, it improved it, but it didn't really solve it, because that increased the friction on the carriage, and it created more problems if you adjusted it to try and take all the slop out. You know, certainly you can get away with stuff if you are mechanical like that, and, you know, kind of extend the life of the saw. But the right way to do it, if you got round rail bores that are loose, is just to rebore it and bush it, or get a different saw.
One of the
Like
things
if you're buying
that
a used saw and the bush on the rails and the carriage are sloppy, I would just avoid it, because you're going to spend all your time rebuilding stuff where, you know, you want to really be spending your time cutting.
Right. One thing, if on the Highland Park square rail saws, we sell a fair amount of replacement carriages that we have a drop-in carriage. And because the adjustability on the roller blocks, that's really successful for people being able to drop in a new carriage in an old 16, 18, 24, even a 36. So you're essentially resurrecting that main part that tends to get sloppy on those units. The rest of those units, they're built like a tank.
Yeah, they'll last forever.
Right. We also sell replacement rails and things like that.
I want to ask everybody, what kind of saws are people running? I'm sure there's some HPs out there, but there's got to be some Phantoms and maybe some old Raytex. What's the
Lortone?
Yeah, HPs. HP, Star Diamond.
Oh, Star Diamond.
There's a Nelson.
Yeah.
Great Western.
Like the Great Westerns.
Phantom. Yeah.
Royal.
Hillquest.
The Hillquest was cool saw. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's good.
I used to have two of the old 18 Lortones.
Yeah.
Raytech had a pretty cool vise on it too, if I remember correctly. I used to have an 18.
Well, the Raytech was cool because they actually, that vise kind of held the rock down, and it was definitely trippy.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, good. A lot of variety.
All right, there's good variety. So a lot of the stuff we're talking about, and if people have specific questions about their saws, I definitely want to talk about. That's not helpful. Thank you. I want to talk about anybody's specific questions about their saws. So if you guys have questions, throw them up here. If you're dealing with a problem, throw it up here and we can talk about it. So while you guys are working on your questions, let me show you the next video, and then we're going to go into some of the questions that are
and pick up Rick's question, because we're going to come back to that one. That's a good question. Rick put up there.
Sometimes people will have problems with arbor bearings and they won't know it. So you put the indicator on the arbor shaft and you go up and down. You should have zero deflection. You put it on the side, and I'm doing this kind of fast because I want to cover a lot of material here with you. On the side and back and forth, no deflection there. So that tells you your arbor bearings are tight. Now you can do that on this side of the arbor shaft, and then you can come back over to this side here and do the same. So that tells you the inboard bearing and the outboard bearing that both are okay.
So that's using the kit that we sell, like all the diagnosis, you'll see me using that indicator. Now, why I use an indicator is it tells me really clearly how much movement I have, because sometimes it's hard to see, and you may have a 30-second of movement. A 30-second of movement will make you crazy when you're trying to get a nice smooth cut. So I recommend, if you don't have an indicator and you have saws, that you get one, because it's a great way for you to be able to look at you know, what's going on with my saw and eliminate things. Because like one of the things that I really want to help people with, like I'll see people post up a question like on a lapidary equipment marketplace group, and they'll be talking about some problem they have with their saw or with the finish on their slab or something, and everybody will just start throwing out all the potential answers without really any kind of like logical thought. And so what I want to be able to provide for you guys is a way to systematically go through looking at all the critical components and being able to measure them and see, nope, I'm good there. My carriage isn't moving, or wait a minute, I got a little movement in my carriage. Maybe that's what's causing my problem. Then fix that and go to the next. So, let's deal with some of the questions. I see a bunch of questions coming in here. Rick asked a question about food grade oil. So the saw will cut for about a minute, then the sound changes and it stops cutting. Okay, well, first of all, food grade mineral oil is not low viscosity. That's about an 18 CST. We recommend a 6 to 7. So there's going to be two problems that are happening. One, when you use a thicker oil, your blade is going to get dull faster because it doesn't flush the cut as well. So then when the blade gets dull, your blade pressure goes up. And as your blade pressure goes up, then your cutting force is going up. So now you're putting a lot more load on your feed mechanism. So what I suspect is happening is you got, I don't know, Rick, where are you located, Rick?
Oregon. Yeah.
Okay. So it's colder now. So now it's colder in your shop, and the viscosity of the oil has gotten even thicker. And so now it's flushing even worse. So all these things compound. Now, the other thing is, and there's a lot of people running food grade oil, and as much as I would advise people not to do that, people are going to do that because they're going to try and save money. If you are running food grade mineral oil, you have to keep your blade sharp. If your blade gets dull, then your blade cutting force goes up, and then you start loading up, and you know, the first thing that will happen is you're either going to yank your rock out of the vise because the blade force is high, or you're going to start making the feed nut skip, because the feed nut will skip when the blade force gets to a certain point. So, Rick, your description is your feed nut is slipping because your blade force is really high. The first thing I would do is sharpen the blade. Follow our blade sharpening video. So, hey, post a link up here for the subscribe to our YouTube channel. I got a question for everybody. How many people have subscribed to our YouTube channel? So if you haven't, you should get on it. We provide a ton of information there. We're really working to help people build their knowledge so they can handle any issues that come up when they're doing their lapidary work, when they're sawing. That's all available to you. It's all free, but it will help us if you subscribe, because it will push us up so more people can see this information.
Right.
So sharpen your blade, and then Rick, of course, talk to us if you're still having problems, because if you keep running a saw, and I want to talk about this because I see it occurring over and over again. So if you're running a saw and the feed starts to slip, well, the first thing it's telling you is your blade force has gotten really high. So immediately sharpen the blade. Now, a lot of times if you do that and you immediately sharpen the blade, then your problem goes away. Now, your problem will get even less if you run the right oil and you keep your blade sharp. If you run the saw for a length of time with the feed nut slipping, then you're going to be calling us up or calling somebody up and getting a new feed screw and a new feed nut, because you're going to wear those out. Because literally you're taking the teeth and dragging them over and dragging them over, and it starts bending over the top of the thread.
Right.
Now, it's really high blade force when it does that. And the big risk is that when your blade force gets high, that you run a high risk of the blade pushing the rock and turning it in the vise or yanking it out of the
Well,
vise.
especially if that's a lower tone style clamp, a horizontal clamp, because that rock can pivot in that vise. That's the
Yeah.
one thing
So
we don't like about it.
When you see a blade crash, 9 times out of 10, it's too much blade force, which means the blade's not sharp and you're running the wrong oil. If you can reduce the blade force, then the cutting is really super.
Yep. We got a lot of questions coming
All
in,
right,
so
so
we're going to
give me
have to
another
pound
question.
through these. There's
Just
a lot of questions.
Run down the top. I can't scroll.
Okay,
here.
so Kathy was asking, why the bearings go bad after 2 years on my HP 16 slab saw?
Well, it's hard to answer that question exactly without knowing all of the environment. That seems a little bit short. Again, blade force will play a part in that, although they should last longer than that.
Yeah.
I
Like in the factory in the Philippines, what's the typical life? Because those are running like 6 days a week, 10 hours a day.
It depends on how hard you're running it. Like in our factory, I would say we probably are replacing the bearings in about 2 years, but we're running every day, all day long. And sometimes the guys don't watch keeping the blades as sharp as I have to go yell at them. But 2 years, not horrible if you're running it really, really hard. If you've got any moisture getting in, or if you're running an oil that's driving your blade force really high, those can affect it.
Oh, one of the things I want to touch base on, you just reminded me, if you live in a climate where you've got a pretty good temperature swing between winter, like morning and nighttime, like think Arizona, think like Cave Creek or Tucson, leave your hood open. Big mistake we see people is they'll close the hood. You'll get condensation in your hood with that temperature change as you cycle your day, unless you're in the middle of the blast furnace summer. So we recommend when you're not using your saw, leave the hood open in general if you're seeing a lot of ambient temperature swing, because you're going to get condensation.
Yeah, that is true.
Yeah,
that is true.
Yeah.
Well, I've seen old HPs where literally inside the Arbor cover, it's just completely crusted up with rust from the condensation.
Yeah, Lee had a question. Any blade alignment on the 12-inch agate specimen saw? Anything different? We're going to cover that probably next week, and it's the same.
It is the same. It is a little bit trickier because of the geometry, but it is basically the same.
Right.
And I can talk about that again when we get into that next week.
Predecessors put new lower tone carriages on our old 12 saws. They seem to fit the round rails, but the screw shaft. Yes, this is a real important issue that Bob was talking about here. So we attempted to do replacement carriages for the lower tones because we reverse engineer them. We're like, okay, we got everything the same. And lo and behold, we discovered there was a fair amount of variability depending on the manufacturing year of the lower tone saws, where the center line of the carriage the feed screw relative to the carriage was off. And so in order to establish that center line with a feed screw against the feed nut, you actually have to bump the rails. That is the only solution. We've ultimately backed away from providing replacement carriages for the lower tones because it's too much of a nightmare for the 200 and some dollars that we making it. I'm like, I don't want the call saying it doesn't fit or your part doesn't fit. So we're kind of abandoning doing replacement parts for those because, at least on that Carriage, because there's just too much variability over the years with the lower tones. We can't get a consistent dimension to know that it's going to work. So to your point, Bob, the only real solution there is relocating the left rail, the rail closest to the feed screw. And it typically means doing a rat tail filing that, opening up maybe a 1/4 inch, and that gives you enough bump that you don't get a deflection on that feed screw. I've done it myself. It's kind of a pain in the ass, but you don't typically need to move the right rail because it's just sitting on that tab. But that left rail is the one that is positioning the alignment of the Carriage to the Arbor. So opening those up, moving that rail, realigning it is really your solution on that.
So I saw a couple of questions here. Matt Nelson and D. Elliott are looking for belt guards. I would just say talk to our staff about that. I have some that will fit the old machines, but not all. So if we got them, I would be happy to help you guys.
Well, we have metal guards. We have the old school
18
HP
and the
guard
24, the trim saw I just don't know about.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I don't know about the trim saw, but for the 18, the 24, I saw somebody had a question on that. Those, we've got those belts and we got that front cast aluminum guard. It's kind of a 2-piece on the old school. Now, if yours is a 1970s era Highland Park saw that had the plastic guard, we don't have a fit on that. Am I correct there, John? Or will our guard work?
No, you can basically cheat and retrofit it with older guards.
But you're going to need to drill some holes for those where those tabs go. And then
when they went to the plastic guards, that was when they were really in my opinion, they started screwing up because you could not put an oil bath on the front gear. Then it was basically, they were sticking grease on it and that was a horrible idea. So Gene is asking if we can put dimensions on bushings in our catalog. Can we, Americar, can you work with KC to have the OD and the ID of the bushings from our Deer Systems, put those into the descriptions on bushings? That's a good idea.
Yeah, that is a good idea.
Okay, I got Arbor just stopped working. Motor box fan shank doesn't spin, and the set screw on the rod. It's not, but the rod comes out of the rail box.
Are you looking off the spreadsheet, John?
I'm not on the spreadsheet. I'm scrolling in the chat, going down logically. So Sandy, I think you're talking about the main feed screw. It sounds to me like there's 2 sets of set screws in that. You got to check both sets of set screws that they're, I think there's a total of 4 set screws that they're all tight.
Yep. Oh, and just folks, like I know people are DMing me here. I'm not seeing it. They're going by too fast. So
I know. I'm
yeah. Don't
I'm
like if you DM me, it's going to vanish.
So
I'm not ignoring you. It vanishes. Let's stay on the spreadsheet, John, because I can just keep going
I can't
down.
easily see it. I'm staying with it.
I'll read.
So, a 14-inch HP, 4 years old, and a 10-inch lower tone. The 14 will bind on hard material. I can get it through by backing it off and restarting several times. The lower tone, replace the Arbor, starts to bind on harder materials after you change the blade. It has an MK303. Okay, so Greg, on this, I would be looking at 2 things. If you're getting binding, I'm going to ask, and you'll hear me do this because I'm going to ask this question of anybody that tells me they have a saw problem. Number 1, what's the oil that you're running? Number 2, what's the blade that you're running? Now, I can tell you this, and some of the people that love MK are going to hate that I say this, but MK outsourced their blades to South Korea, and then they made a second move to Indonesia, and the blade cutting force went up because they changed their matrix that they're casting their diamond in. If you're running the MK, and there's a lot of MK blades out there, and I won't tell people they shouldn't run an MK, but I'm going to tell you this: if you're running an MK, you got to make sure you keep that blade sharp.
Sharpen it.
If you do not keep the blade sharp, then what happens is your blade force goes way up. Now, the other thing I'm going to talk about with blade force is that you can dish the blade. Now, next week, I'll show you in alignment. I'll talk about blade dishing. But if your blade gets dished, then you're going to see binding. So my guess is, you got to look at blade force and dishing. If you got a dish blade, and of course, if I would say you run it 4 years, I'd be checking your alignment, making sure everything's still good and that your carriage adjustment is correct.
Do you want to roll that video on the? I'm assuming this is a 14.
I will get to that. I want to cover a lot of these, and then we're going to go through all the video content, and some of it will help. But this is really specific, and this is really common.
Yeah,
the blade force goes up. The blade force goes up, and the blade starts to get dished.
Yeah.
So if you get a hard metal ruler, a good quality one, lay it on the side of the blade. If it rocks, or if you see a gap in the middle and then you put it on the other side and it rocks, then your blade is dished. And if your blade is dished, you're in a situation where you kind of have to either find somebody that will retension the blade, which there's not very many guys know how to do that anymore, or replace the blade. Yeah. So I talk about blade force a lot because blade force is always at the core of problems with a slab saw. If you can keep your blade force down, then you will have much better results.
Why don't you explain, because you're explain blade force just to make sure it's super clear, because this is an important concept.
Actually, Marikar, do you have that graph that we used from one of the other videos that shows the it was when we did oil, and I did an experiment where I measured the force on the feed screw based on the viscosity of the oil and on the type of the blade.
I know which one you're talking about.
Yeah, you guys find that. I'm gonna we don't have a checklist, Don. We don't, or Walt, we don't have a checklist yet.
Oh, there you go. Go
okay,
to that.
So basically what I did is I put a transducer, like it's like a transducer that's used in a scale, but I put it on the end of the feed screw with a thrust bearing on it. And then I took this 18-inch saw, and I ran a 303 blade, I ran a green line blade, and I ran our HP precision blade.
So this one here is the green line on the bottom. This is the HP segmented blade, and this is the 303 here.
Right. So, and this was done, I don't know, I did this quite a while ago. It was probably 5 years ago. But anyway, what this shows you is as the oil viscosity went up, the blade cutting force goes up.
So this is the viscosity here.
This, when I talk about blade cutting force, this is how hard that feed screw is pushing the carriage and shoving the rock into the blade. And you can see I was getting up here where we're 45 pounds of force on it.
Right there.
And I can tell you this, in the 24, I've seen the 24 blade force on a badly run saw, it go excess of 70, and you know your blade's done. If you're running it like that very long, the blade is going to be dished.
So this
because
is
what happens is the blade tries to escape to the easiest path. So if the rock has any varying hardness, the blade's it's gonna move to try and go to the softer path. It's not going to necessarily move in a straight line.
Yeah, I mean it's you think about like you're pushing something.
Steve Capezzi just asking a question that is right along the same lines. Is when you see deflection and you see a tapered slab, two things are happening. You have our oil is 6 CST, not 16. Food grade is 16, 18. Ours is 6. Yes. When the blade is coming into the rock and you cut a slab, and then if you come off the tail end, that the slab is a different thickness, or the blade springs out from the rock. What that tells you is you probably got a dish blade and you got some kind of potentially some kind of alignment problem. So again, I think we got more questions here. I think let's go to what's our other video we have now, Markar?
And John, we also have a couple of people raising their hand.
Yep, and I see Mike there, Connie, and
we're going to have tons. You guys love these kind of questions, don't you? Because you actually get some real information to fix your problems.
Yeah.
I know we have more questions. I do want to get through some of the video content. So let's go to the next video and we'll do more questions.
I got my bearings set in here. You've got to make sure this is clean and there's no burrs, and that you look at your flange, it's not all chewed up here. If you got a flange that's all chewed up, replace it. Your blade will never run true if your flange is all junked up, or if the front of your shaft is all damaged. Because this is what this flange on this shoulder is what guides that blade. So if this isn't flat, the whole blade's going to sit there and rock. Now, a lot of people have problems because they put their rock in their vise a little low, and then they came back and the rock rode up on the flanges and chewed them up. And then they try and keep running it like that, and they're not going to run true. And the other thing I check is when I set it in there, if I push like this, it shouldn't rock at all. If I get rocking, it tells me either the shaft or the flange is bad.
No. Yeah. All right. So let's, how many more questions do we have that came in on the chat that I haven't answered yet?
We got a bunch. Why don't you want to handle the guys with the hands up?
Yeah, let's talk to
bring
Mike
up. Mike's got that handsome beard, man. That's good.
Oh yeah. Oh, thank you.
Looking good.
So what's your
cover
question,
up
Mike?
years of abuse there, I think. Yeah. Basically, I've got an old HP. How old? I don't know. 1970s ish. I bought it secondhand, maybe 8 years ago.
Is it a square rail?
Pardon me?
Square rail or round rail?
Yes, square.
Okay.
It's if it helps, the number on it is the 20 SSP. If that makes any sense, it has an old.
Could be a 20
sight.
inch. I mean, they've changed the models a lot over the years, but it sounds like a 20 inch.
Yeah, I know the saw. So what's your question on that saw?
It has a lucite top to it, which I like because I can look and see what's going on without having to shut it down, open the hood, do that sort of thing. It does have a split, and the split is getting bigger. My fault. The flange or whatever, the arm that holds it was loose, and it cracked down a couple of times and put a split. I guess that's old school. They're all maybe metal now. Do you sell replacements for old things like that?
We do have a replacement for that saw.
Yeah,
okay.
And you can do it. But the other thing you can do is some guys have had success just using some fiberglass repair cement to fiberglass up that crack, just strengthening it. I mean, you don't necessarily have to replace that.
Usually when they get that old and brittle, then it's just a matter of time. And I will say this, right now, I had just checked yesterday and we're out of stock on pretty much all the hoods. And I hadn't been pushing hoods over because the container cost went really stupid high. So I wasn't pushing hoods over then because the impact to the ocean freight and the cost would impact.
It takes a lot of space, I guess.
Yeah. So, and it started to come back down a little bit. So if you are wanting to get one, it's probably probably 3 months before I can shove it. So like if you ordered one now, you would have it 3 months from now, probably.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just
I think I might try.
the hoods, I shove them in where I get free space. Like if I ship a 36D, I can put some hoods inside of it. That way I can keep the price low for you all. If I take, like when I ship a 36 saw, that saw ocean freight cost me $1,500 just to get it to America.
Okay.
So I don't want to, like, you can translate, when the container's $21,000, you can translate that, how that is going to impact each and everything in it. So
Sure.
that's why on the hoods, I've been just reluctant to push those until, the price.
I would initially try to fiberglass it up, strengthen it up a little bit.
I will. Should I go ahead and get like the glass, the sheet, like you're doing a canoe, that type? Or is there a glue to try and put in the split?
Well, you could get
the oil off.
You could get a piece of Lexan and actually glue it where it's not going to interfere with the arm or anything. Glue it and reinforce it.
Okay.
And there's a number of different glues that will work for that. But that's probably what I would start with. Like reinforce it with a piece of 1/8 inch Lexan. I'm not Lexan. Plexiglass. You don't want to use Lexan.
Plexiglass will shatter. I mean,
plexiglass will not. Plexiglass will bond to that cover. Lexan won't bond really well to it. So you want to use the plexiglass in this case.
Okay. All right.
Okay. Very good. Thank you.
All right. Thanks,
Good.
Mike.
Thanks, Mike.
Yes.
Hal, let's pull up. I see Connie, but Connie's got no video on. Connie, kick your video on.
Let's go ahead and take Eric.
Eric, come on up.
We're doing Connie. Can you hear us, Connie?
Yeah, I'm here if you're ready. This is Eric.
Eric, doesn't sound like Connie.
I have 3 quick questions. One is a few sessions ago, I talked about making a bracket that would go on the anvil, essentially, and the vise that would extend the panel out a little bit to keep the rocks from dropping over. I haven't made anything like that. Have you contemplated making those? Because you can make them in fairly small widths. That's question number 1. I'll let you sit on that for a while.
Yep.
Question number 2.
Yeah, remember that bracket, John, that kind of goes over
It's on my list. I just got a lot of stuff that's in front of it right now.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, well, I would find that very useful. The second one is, you were mentioning a little earlier, the HPs with the plastic cover. That's what I have. I've replaced the front of it like that. I was just wondering, I'm having a little problems with feed, and I figured that the split nut is probably the original. Does the split nut you sell now fit the screw that I would have?
And what size saw is that again?
The 24-inch.
Yep. Round rail, square rail.
Square.
Yep. It'll drop in.
So it matches the same thread. Okay, so I'll go order one of those.
Let me caveat one thing, Eric, here. When you put that new feed dog in there, you need to adjust that dog plate. That's the plate that bolts to the carriage, because the center line might be off. Because remember, all those were hand done in the old days. So they put adjustment in there, so you can adjust that to line it up. And we have a video that shows you exactly how to do that.
Grab that feed dog adjustment video link and throw it in the chat.
Thank you. And then the last one, can you use your alignment tool to measure, in a way, the blade resistance? What do you call it? The blade force?
No,
Okay.
Because blade
I was
force.
just wondering if there's a way of
Well, your best indicator for blade force is listening to the saw. Like
Right.
if you listen to a saw that's cutting really well, you'll hear it and be like,
Okay.
it will sound really good. And then if you walk in your shop and you hear, like it's really straining and you can hear the motors loaded up more, then you know the blade force is high.
Okay, I don't have that issue. I just wondered if there was a way as a home person to easily kind of check it.
No, you gotta listen to the saw, and then and look at your slabs. If you start seeing anything that looks like tapering on your slabs, it means you haven't been sharpening enough.
Right. And the sharpening, the cool thing is midway cut. Put that link up there for the sharpening video, guys. Mid cut. If you're feeling that, stop, open your saw, sharpen your blade, just pull your carriage back, sharpen the blade, put it back in, because that's also how you're going to train your ear. You're going to hear before and after. And you do that a couple times. John taught me this. Now I can hear the difference because I can do that directly. Like I'm like, okay, I'm going to sharpen the blade, go back to the same rock cutting, and I'll hear sonically that change in the way that it sounds when it's cutting. Make sense? Okay, cool. Well, then let's roll to, do you want to do another video or you want to go to more questions?
What's the next video we have? And Sal, you can put the biggest rock you can fit in the vise on that old 24. It can take anything you can fit in that vise.
Yeah.
Now I want to talk about one other little thing, because this is really common and it causes people problems. In the feed screw on most of the feed screw type saws, this is true on Phantom, this is true on HP. If this bushing here for the gear is on the front on HPs and on the back it's in Phantom. But if this bushing gets worn where you can grab the shaft and it goes up and down or side to side, this is directly a problem. Now that bushing's cheap, just a few bucks. But on the other side of the wall here are the gears. Now, if you see what happens here, now I haven't tightened these up, but if you see what happens here, if this shaft moves up and down, these teeth are small. And if it moves up and down very much, then it changes the way the teeth engage. So if your bushing gets worn and it starts dropping down, now all of a sudden your teeth are down here engaging instead of up here. That means this worm and this gear are going to get worn out much faster. Now, the other thing is people pack grease in this, and grease is horrible for it because the grease will get kind of pushed out of the way or get dried out a little bit, and then you don't get lubrication. So we recommend running the housing with the ultra black, glue it, it won't leak. Then put 80 weight gear oil, like the Gearbox oil, 80, 90 weight. And then when you come in and adjust this, and we have a video on exactly how to adjust this, both up and down here and front to back, then you won't have problems. The gears will last a long time. But you have to keep an eye, because let me talk about the second thing, which is when people run their saws and they get really dirty and they don't keep their blade sharp, and there's a lot of blade pressure. It's pushing on this shaft because this shaft is pushing against the feed dogs, running the feed dogs forward. So this shaft is pushing back really hard. And basically that flange on this bushing right here, look down in here at the bushing, that flange starts getting thinner and thinner and thinner. Now what happens when that flange gets thinner is it's translating, come over and look on the other side, the gear. As that flange is getting thinner, this gear is moving out. Oh. So if that flange gone, then your gear's engaged like this. So if you look at that stuff and you pay attention to this one bushing right here, same bushing, but on the back of the Phantom, that one bushing there, you can save yourself a lot of trouble just by replacing that periodically. And you can replace it without tearing everything out of the saw. You take the gearbox off, pull the gear out, take this collar out, take the feed screw out, and then you can take a socket and tap the bushing out, and then I just put a bolt in there and draw that bushing in with a bolt, so I don't even have to take the bracket or anything out. I can just replace it on the fly. So that I wanted to cover that because that is a really common thing I see. And sure, I could sell a lot more gears, but I'd rather you guys spend your money on rock and stuff that is going to be good for you rather than, oh, you didn't replace your one bushing and now you have to buy a set of gears.
Yeah, this is the number one reason people buy gears, is that little bushing, which is $6, $5. It's stupid cheap. Wipes out and then somebody loses $180 set of gears. Or in the case of Phantoms, they're even more expensive. So I always tell people, and I tell my staff, when somebody's ordering worms and gears, always talk about the bushing, because the bushing is like it's the part that's going to prevent that damage of that gear. And it always kills me when I see somebody wipes that out. One of the things I wanted to touch base on, John, and this is a little editorial that John and I've talked about, is when in the 70s, you know, like when we had the Vega and the Pinto, and quality was really going downhill in America. One of the things that we had a theory about is that in slab saws, you also had this kind of cheapening and this orientation around how do we produce a regular repeating a revenue stream for customers. And I had one of the competitors I had lunch with probably 10 years ago, and they're like, you shouldn't sell replacement parts. And I'm like, why shouldn't I sell replacement parts? Because if you can buy replacement parts, then they won't buy a new saw. And I'm like, but if your saw is a good saw, why do you need to buy a new part of saw just because you didn't have? And that's a mindset around, let's goose the customer for either something that is proprietary and difficult, like the old Sealmaster weird bearings that Highland Park used. It was like the late 60s and 70s. You had to buy from them. Or the gear, like the moving away from that box. It's stuff for us that we're always like, what was the agenda behind it? Were the bean counters in there changing things to try to get that recurrent revenue? For us, we just think, I'd rather you buy rock.
Yeah, well, some of it's accidental, some of it's deliberate, but bottom line is that what we want to do is we want to provide the information. Like I see Steve's question here about, you know, getting answers to technical questions. This is why I am regularly on Facebook in the Lapidary Equipment Marketplace group, looking at questions, and people will tag me on stuff because I'm always helpful to, you know, wanting people to be able to solve their problem. And I also see that when people pose a question up there, there's like 1,000 responses to it, and a whole lot of them are either confusing or not helpful, or they don't really know how to break the problem down into the pieces. And that's what we're working to do here. Like all these videos that we're showing you today, they're all going to be available on YouTube. So you guys can go through and diagnose exactly what's going on. So Steve, what I would tell you is subscribe to our YouTube group and look at our videos. There's a lot of technical information in there, and we do our best to try and name it around what it is. And this video set is really around taking you through the process of how do you understand what's going on and diagnose the problem, because it's very, very, like, once you understand all the pieces that are in play here, then it's very, very simple to you know, figure out the problem and understand it. Like I saw a statement up here, and I can't remember who it was, but there's a lot of questions. You know, we were talking about one of the problems that somebody said that the carriage isn't running smoothly. And that's what I like, the very first video on looking at the carriage. That's what that video is designed to show you, is how to tell if your carriage is not running smoothly.
And you actually, let's play that video about the high tone adjustment, because there you're talking about that, where it's there, you've got the thing's not.
All right, let's do that. Let's do that one. We're running out of time here, so that will be our last video that we run for today, and we're going to continue this this topic for next week, because I can see there's a tremendous amount of interest, and all the questions that have come in, Mark, are make sure that everything we haven't addressed that's captured, that we'll speak to that. Like we'll do a few more after this video.
Now, I want to talk about this because I sometimes see people having problems with their feed on these saws. Now, there's several reasons why that happens. I mean, we talk about it a lot in our videos where we say, run the right oil, a 6 CST oil, and put a good blade on there and keep it sharp. Now, people immediately go, if they have a problem, they immediately go to, there's something wrong with the saw. Now, one of the things, if you look at this design, the way the rails are mounted in here, there's a bolt that tightens down through the collar onto the shaft, and then this nut jams the collar up against this plate. Now, the UPS guys are pretty rough, and sometimes they'll throw the unit out of the back of the truck. And while it won't damage the saw, it may knock it out of alignment a bit because that impact on the ground, if it hits on its side, the weight of the carriage hammering against this rail, it might move this a very tiny amount. So if this moves in that hole just the tiniest bit, it can throw the alignment out. It's still going to be pretty close. But if you have the alignment kit, then you can come in and the alignment screws here are accessible. So you don't even have to take the cover off to do a small adjustment. You can literally put the indicator on, check it on a point on the blade, and then see, oh, I need to tweak it a little bit and get it dialed in perfectly. The other thing is, if you're having problems, some people go, well, maybe it's the carriage, and then they'll come in here and they'll tighten these screws up. Like they'll crank down on them too much, and then they'll have drag. And then what happens is the thing will start to feed and it will load up, and then it will go scooch. And it'll load up and scooch. And so then when you look at the cut's like, and it will be little tiny ridges on the cut because they have the carriage so tight. So when you look at this, the carriage should be where there's a little bit of friction. You can feel that there's some drag on these rollers. And this is true on any saw. If your carriage is super tight rolling, it's going to translate into the cuts because it will load up and you'll go from static to kinetic friction, and you'll get a little nudge forward. It will be small, maybe only a 32nd of an inch, but it will translate to you see something on the face of the slab. So this adjustment, don't get it too tight. If you can grab it and you can move it and see it, then adjust it a little and check all three and make sure that you don't have one that's too tight. On the old saws, you got to check these bolts and make sure somebody hasn't loosened them up, because if these rails get loose in there, it's going to also give you some problems. Let's see. I'm sure in our conversation we'll cover some other things here, but
that pulsing thing that John's talking about, where it's loading up and then moving, loading up and moving, that's definitely going to translate over into marks on your slab when you're cutting.
Yeah, that's the most common error that people make if they adjust the carriage on an old lower tone or on our what we call high tones. If they get it too tight, then you're going to see that where the carriage starts to push and goes, and if it's too loose, then it's going to sit there and lift up when the blade comes into it, and then be moving, and you'll get the same kind of thing. It's really easy to adjust. We made it so it's super, like I hate stick.
Daryl asked the question. Daryl said, I have a big problem adjusting my lower tone, the vise on my lower tone. It seems I need to turn the whole thing upside down to adjust the thumb screws that are used.
Exactly. I used to have a bunch of them in my shop, cutting agates and stuff. And I always hated to have to adjust the carriage because I had to lift the whole thing out of the tank, turn it over, and mess with those stupid little angle iron brackets and the nuts. And so when I wanted to redesign this so it doesn't have that kind of a problem, I just made it so it's like a lever, and you have a set screw from above that just adjusts that roller bearing up onto the rail. But you can't go crazy on it. You crank down too hard, then that friction becomes too great. So
are you good to do a few more questions here?
Yeah.
Okay, so Virginia, she was asking, on my HP24, hard materials will cut and then stop moving, get loud and cut again, then quiet, stop moving. However, it doesn't trip the motor. I assume I need to sharpen the blade, but what is happening? Am I damaging the drive mechanism? And should I not cut in cold weather? I think this gets back to the first question. What coolant?
Yeah, first question.
Number one question.
Okay, let's get the answer to that. I want to see what coolant she's running.
You there, Virginia? Unless she's embarrassed, she's like, I'm running large animal there. Oh, Virginia. Hey there. I think we can't hear you. I think we got to open your mic up on your computer. You're unmuted here. Well, maybe a mic on and off on the computer.
Yeah. if you can't get your microphone to work, just type in the chat.
You can
Because we
type it in
can't
the
hear
chat too. Yeah, we'll just answer it in the chat. We can get it answered that way too.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I'll look for that coming in.
To answer Virginia's question, what's happening is your feed inserts are worn and slipping.
Well, but you're saying
No.
inserts, but you're using a language. We don't know if it's got inserts or not.
Yeah. Okay. Well, your feed dog, basically. So again, this is translating to, okay. So the Rob Club sells the oil. So your first problem is you got a thick oil. Your second problem is maybe you're not sharpening your blade. And yes, what's happening now is the feed mechanism is slipping. And when you hear that, the saw goes in and boom. It's just the teeth, the threaded teeth, it's building up pressure and it jumps over. And now it's loading up again and then it jumps over. So when you hear that, that's your feed nut slipping. Now, it could be, if this is an old HP, it could be the feed nut's really old, but it's going to be compounded by what oil you're running and what blade you're running and how sharp you're keeping the blade.
Right.
You run the 6CST oil, keep your blade sharp, even if you're running the less, you know, the less good MK, in my opinion, because I tested it. People run them. People are going to run them. I'm not going to tell people they can't run an MK blade, but I'm going to tell you this. If you want good results, sharpen the damn blade. You got to keep it sharp because they're a harder matrix, so they don't sharpen themselves as well.
Yeah. And
if you ping the blade, then you're going to improve your results a lot and you're going to have less problems.
And pinging for the new people, that's using the bastard or mill file. We put a video up here. Drop that video again for somebody. Drop that video in there.
And we're going to cover that next week. We're going to, Stellar. I know Kevin really well. Kevin's oil is the closest thing to ours that I know of.
Mm-hmm.
So his is a recycled oil and he puts that orange stuff in it. I don't like that as much. I don't want to smell like oranges, but as far as performance, his oil will do the job. But the vegetable oil, not the vegetable, don't even think about vegetable oil. The food grade mineral oil and the vet oil, just if people call us almost always if they have problems, that's the oil they're running. Right. And in the wintertime, it gets thicker and we get way more calls.
And it goes like this: your saw's not cutting, or your blade's not cutting. Note the word "your." The ownership suddenly translated back to me.
Yes, Kurt, you can ping an agate eater for sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, ping. Generally, it's one of the most free cutting blades you're going to see, so you're probably not going to have to ping it very much.
I do ping it fairly often on my drop saw because I run the piss out of that.
Yeah.
And a new agate eater, I prefer to ping it before I do my first cut, because it's going to cut better. It almost has like a little hard glaze in it, which I just ping in order so I can get that thing going maximum speed. Somebody actually said something about speed, about going slow. So there is a philosophy that people say, well, run really slow. Our mindset, because we cut for money commercially, we are not interested in going slow because it's money. And for you, for anybody, it's electricity costs. It's how much time it takes. So if you run a slow speed versus a high speed.
Well, I will say this, Sherman. I will say this because there's going to be different camps here.
True.
Yeah. If I'm cutting high end Laguna agate for me, I'm running slow. Because one, when I exit the end of that nodule, I want it to come out as slow as possible. I don't want any chipping on the back edge. I'm cutting for a specimen. If I'm cutting slabs to make cabs, then I want the thing to go as fast as I can. But if I'm cutting an opalite or an opalitic agate, I'm going to slow it down because I don't want to crack it.
Yeah. Yeah, Jan's solution. I've been to Jan's shop. So he has those engine block heaters in his shop. Probably in that 24 that I brought you. And that's a solution to kind of keep your viscosity up. I mean, viscosity down. And Jan's a good guy because I got a blowout coming there and he insisted on paying for a replacement tire for me, which was top grade. Jan, it still impresses me to this day. Good guy. So ping what we're saying, Eric. By the way, Eric has the friggin' dream studio. I saw your picture, Eric. Crazy beautiful shop you got there.
You can call it peen, we call it ping. Bottom line is you're wrapping on the edge of the blade with a bastard file. There's some people that are actually using a hammer. I like a bastard file better because it has more likelihood of fracturing the diamond. Because the serrated edges, if you hit the diamond right on the edge, you're going to crack it. That's part of what makes it cut. But if it works. So any other questions here? I think
I got more.
I'll do one more question, and then I think we're going to have to jump off because I've got other stuff lined up here.
Okay, so let me see. Okay, so Jeep Overland, this is a good question. So got here late, 24 HPL, green line egg eater, cutting is great, use the HPL oil, slow feed speed, get scratches. Old Saw did not get these with a segmented diamond blade. Should I change blades? What material is part of the question?
Wait. First question asked, how many cuts have you done with that blade?
Right. Can Jeep Overland put that in there?
Just throw a comment up there. How many cuts have you done with that blade?
He may not be online.
Yeah. And so Eric asked the question, how many hours of usage between pinging the blade? Well, the answer to that question is going to be dependent on what oil you're running and what petrified wood you're cutting. Yeah, if you're cutting some of the Texas wood, then you can run a lot longer. If you're cutting Arizona, I would probably be pinging that blade once a day.
Yeah. Yeah. On the green line, there is a break-in period on that blade. So when you first start cutting with it, it's going to not cut as smooth because essentially those segments are pressed into the edge and you're wearing those things down smooth and breaking that blade in. So they don't pre-grind that. So if you think about our segmented blade, that's actually pre-faced. So it actually cuts pretty nice right off the get-go. Whereas the green line, it's really optimized for cutting.
Anybody that knows Alex Small, I mean, you look at his slabs, he's running pretty much green lines on all his saws. You look at his slabs and they're like polished on the sides. And that's because he runs those blades and they have a break-in time for the sides. I mean, they're an inexpensive blade. I brought them because I see they cut really well. They got huge segment life. They're great for clubs. They're great for beginners. They're great for people cutting less expensive material, and they have a break-in time. You got to get them broke in so you start getting a good finish. I saw another question I wanted to. Once a day, Michael. Okay, so let me define a day. A day would be like 8 hours of cutting at least. So if you're cutting for an hour, then I'm like, nah, you don't need to ping it. But if you're cutting for 8 hours and you're cutting petrified wood, yeah, hell yeah, I would do it every 8 hours. Adjustment.
Somebody ask about pellet. Is pellet okay? Pellet oil? Yeah, we've run it. It works. It's just stinky.
Pellet is pretty thin, but boy, man, that stuff stinks. And every time you go in the house, your woman's going to be complaining about how bad you smell.
Or your husband, or let's see. Ricardowski of drive screw motor, and this kind of ties into Sandy. Sandy, the bushing in the gearbox is not the same on the 10 HT. The 10 HT saw, the high tone 12, I mean, it has a gear motor in there. There's not a gear and a feed like we showed you on the bigger saw. Right. And this ties to the question that Ricard had is, does the drive screw motor need maintenance, checking, cleaning also? We created a video that showed some tips on that. Remember that, John?
I don't remember that.
Yeah, I created a video. It's up on the YouTube channel. Basically, yes, getting in there, doing a lubrication. I wouldn't do it. I wouldn't do it right away. Like run it for years.
Put
Or
it
it
this
starts.
way, on that gear motor, because of the way it's built, honestly, I wouldn't mess with it unless it stops feeding.
We've had the old Dayton motor stop feeding, and we could resurrect them by lubricating them.
You just take like the nice thing about all of this stuff, and you'll see this in my philosophy of design. I hate stuff that I cannot take apart and fix. I don't want a plastic sealed box. I don't want something that's not serviceable. Like I don't like the old Arbor bearings that they put in the old HP 12s and 10s, because you really couldn't service them. They're custom bearing. I don't like stuff like that. Our gear motors, you can disassemble them completely and redo the grease in them. Will you have to do that in 5 years? Probably not. Probably take 10, 15, maybe 20 years before that grease will dry out. So honestly, on those, I wouldn't mess with them. I would run it, and if the motor stops, take it apart, look at it. If the grease is dried up or something like that, then service it. It's a standard motor. We kept everything really standard, so it's accessible. So I wouldn't worry about maintaining that, because it's a sealed gearbox basically.
Yeah.
And then Daryl, and this is the last question for today, because I'm late. I gotta be somewhere else now. Looks like our 10-inch saw has the same rails as lower tones. Do you have an adjustment video for your 10-inch? I don't think I have an adjustment video for that high tone 10.
I think I actually created one.
Okay, so can you look and throw a link up here? Markar, if we have a link, put it up in the chat.
It's gonna be a high tone series. It's like if you send them the link to the playlist for all the high tone series maintenance videos, that's probably going to be in there.
So so anyway, yes, that saw is almost exactly the same, except I eliminated all the stupid stuff. I put adjustments on the Arbor bearings. I made the
pillow block, cast iron pillow block bearings with grease zerts.
I made the whole carriage out of cast iron instead of cast aluminum, because if it's going to ride on those rails, cast aluminum is not going to last long. And then I put a crossfeed bushing in it, so it's serviceable. And I put a fine thread crossfeed in it, because that coarse thread sucked. It's too grainy.
Too fast.
Adjust your slab thickness. I did a few other things.
We made it heavier too. I mean, it's a lot thicker steel.
Booted up the gauge. But anyway, it is the same, and we can teach you how to do that. It's not hard. But on that saw, it is a pain in the ass to align the blade.
Yeah.
And
Daryl, I got a new 12 inches in stock.
So once again, to everybody, please subscribe to our YouTube channel. Help us push this content up on YouTube, so more people can get into Lapidary, more people can see how to fix their equipment, more people can be inspired to do all the cool stuff that we've been doing. So,
and another thing that would really help us is if you're finding value in this, give us a good review on Google. Google us, give us a good review. I mean, that makes a difference, because everybody pays attention to reviews, and so we really try hard. We're not perfect. We fuck up some things from time to time, but we always focus on making it right. So we'd love to have give us a good review, help us kind of get it. I mean, we want to keep delivering value to you.
Richard, tell us what kind of videos you want to see.
Yeah.
Anybody, if there's something that is a problem or a challenge, or you want to understand it better, just send us a message and say, we'd love to see a video on this. And chances are we'll make the video.
Yeah. Yeah. We're all set up to rip videos pretty easily, either here or over there in the factory. Soon we're going to be back into our cutting factory over in the Philippines too, which has been shut down for 2 years. But the benefit is we got a lot of cool team members now doing this with us. So, all right, guys. Thank you all.
Thanks everybody for coming and attending. And
next week, same time, and we got a lot of content that we'll work through and more questions answered. Thank you, guys.
All right. Thank you very much, John and Sherman. And tonight is indeed very helpful session to everyone. We can see people are so engaged and we have a lot of questions covered. This is actually the main purpose of us doing this, to share education and information with everyone that's in the lapidary art. And on that note, we encourage everyone to collaborate with us on our next webinar, share more educational and informational content with the lapidary community. So if you're interested to be part of this, don't hesitate to give us a holler, and we'll definitely be very happy to have you. And do not forget as well to share your thoughts, as what Sherman mentioned earlier, about the services, and share your pictures with the machines and rough rocks on our Google review. Give us a good review. It will really help us, in this journey. And we're going to be posting the link there for the Google review. So thank you so much again for tonight, guys. See you next week. Have a good night.